So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about God and Jesus and how they relate to one another um, through a very simple slideshow that I put together. And because I wanted to keep it quick and move it along, I'm not going to be talking about all the details, not saying everything that could be said about each slide. Just going to try to move it along. And I'm not a preacher and I'm not a teacher. So the purpose of this is not to instruct anybody. It's just something that I enjoy doing, and me wanting to share what I believe God has showed me, and I hope you enjoy it. So right off the bat, I'm gonna throw a slide at you that's hard to read. Sorry about that. I'm just working with what I have here. So the verses listed here on the screen are very important because they identify the Father as the only true God, and drawing a strong distinction between God and Jesus. Jesus is the one that's quoted as saying, "The Father is the only true God." While we know that there are others in the Bible that are called gods, and the most prominent figure, of course, is Jesus himself. But even he, when talking to the Father, identifies the Father as the one that is on a scale or a scope that no other being or person is on par with. And this is where a lot of people try to insert the idea that, well, Jesus was the Father. Okay, that's strange for a lot of different reasons. First of all, in just the verse that I just quoted in John 17, if that were true, then what you have is the Father talking to himself, telling himself that he is the only true God. And then just a few verses away from that, you have the Father asking himself to glorify himself with the glory that he had with himself before the foundation of the world. Now, if that sounds really strange, it's because it is, and you run into all kinds of weird stuff. For instance, when the apostles asked Jesus when the end was going to come. So, if he's supposed to be the Father, this is really strange because he tells them that he doesn't know, that only the Father knows. The angels don't in heaven don't even know. And so we go that route, and we're definitely on a road that doesn't go to a good place. But that is not to say that the Father did not indwell Jesus, because he most certainly did that. And we're going to get into that a little bit later into the slideshow. So please don't misunderstand on that point. Okay, so the question arises, well, who is Jesus then? Well, according to Paul in Colossians, he's the firstborn over all creation. In other words, the birth of the Son of God happened before anything else happened. He preceded all creation. So, before the birth of the Son of God, there was only God himself and nothing else. Then the Son of God was born at an unknown point in time, and then through the Son of God, the Father created everything else. Now, the Trinitarians, they don't believe this at all. They take firstborn as to be figurative, like saying that he just had a lofty title or he has a lofty position. Well, we can see that in verse 18 it's certainly literal, because it says he's the firstborn from the dead. Well, we know that Christ was literally the first one to die, to resurrect, and to never die again. And so in the whole context, it's all pointing to a prior point in time that God is putting his Son first, literally. He is the first of all things created in verse 15. In verse 17, he is before all things. In verse 18, he's the beginning, and again the firstborn. And then it ends with preeminence, the translation I'm holding in my hands. All meaning first. Just look at your Strong's Concordance. And there's still some that say, well, it doesn't mean first. Sons have beginnings. If you didn't have a beginning, then there's no way you're a son. That's just the way it works. I mean, it's a pretty simple idea. Eternal sonship is a Catholic doctrine, and a very bizarre one at that. So now to bring in some simple illustrations and recap what's already been said. There was a time when there was only the Father, the true God, the God of gods. Never had a beginning, never going to have an end. He was there by himself, all powerful. And then, at some unknown point in eternity past, he decided to bring forth the Son, his Son, the Son of God. So, when this Son come about, what would he be like? Well, if things in the physical world are patterned after the things of the spiritual, we can look at that and we can tell that every species on earth brings forth of its own kind. Cows have calves, and dogs have dogs, and cats and kittens and everything else. So if God in the spiritual had a son, would not the son be typed after some kind of pattern after his father? I think so. And I think that makes a lot of scriptures make sense. For in instance, in Genesis, let us create man in our image, indicating that there was an image that they both shared. And in Philippians, it tells us that Jesus, or the Son, existed in the form of God at a point in time. And so that is not to say that there was two gods. But just like in the physical realm, the sons share characteristics of their father, of their parents. And keep in mind, just because someone's dad may be the CEO of a huge corporation, and they may be a spitting image of their dad, that does not make them the CEO of that company as well. However, his father being the CEO, he has all the power to bestow a lofty position to that son. Does the book of Acts not tell us that God made Jesus Lord and Christ? Okay, so there was a time when there was just the Father, and then the Son come about, and then it was just them. And then comes creation. And the Bible is very consistent in telling us that God created everything through Jesus, through his Son. Now we can never lose track of that word through, because that's what the Bible tells us. A lot of folks like to skip that word, but you can't do it. If you want to remain scriptural, that is. So what's that tell us? It tells us that God is always the source of the power. Even in the earthly ministry of Jesus, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, the book of Acts tells us that it was God doing the miracles through Jesus. And Jesus said the same thing. He said, "It's not me, it's the Father that dwelleth in me." And so it's these key verses that if we keep them exactly like they're read, it makes everything line up perfectly. So this concludes part 1 In part two, we'll pick up from the virgin birth and go from there.